I just wanted to record a bit of an interim video in between turns, as it were, of the game Storm of Steel, to address a few things that I spoke about before, and also to just talk about some other things if I can remember what I wanted to talk about. Perhaps the first thing I should do is that in the introductory I said that C movement is via these squares, and that's not true. Those squares are purely longitude and latitude squares, so it's just sort of character of the map. C movement is by seas, so you see there's a blue dotted line here that divides the Atlantic Ocean from the East Pacific. I think the Pacific counts as one whole. They don't mention them being, because you've got the rest Pacific here separate. So you've got the Arctic, Atlantic, East Pacific. And then similarly on the land areas you have like Siberia, which is here, and that's in a separate region from Russia. And essentially the way movement works in here is boats can only move one sea area, so a boat has to be obviously at a port. This is actually a submarine unit. In any season it could move to another sea area and it could go into the port. I don't think it has to, but that's how you transport units. So for example, America has units. Actually I should put those down in America, yes. So to get these onto the actual map of the theatres, you would need to put a unit there, and then it would just be transported straight across. But if, for example, you wanted to bring that unit down to the Indian Ocean, you could drop them off in a port in, say, where does it say, in India here, and then from India they could move into Turkey, and then that would bring them off map. So it would take one season to move to India, and then the next season they would come on the map at this point. Now, one important point to note is the Central Powers cannot bring units onto this map, so this is really purely for logistics of moving these units around and bringing them in from America. And then if you get people like Brazil joining the war on the Entente side. Now there are one or two places in the rules that hint at something different. There's one place which specifically says that I can't remember what it exactly says, but it suggests that one of these, say Brazil, might come in on the side of the Central Powers, but then seeing as they can't bring any transports on here, how are they ever going to get them into the war? So that's one thing a bit confusing, and perhaps that brings me to the next point quickly, which is previously I downplayed the amount of errata in the game, and I sort of poo-pooed it because the game before, when I played this before, I just played the Eastern Front, and so I didn't really find any problems with the rules there. But then with this full game, I'm bringing in movements on and off map. That's quite a big feature in the rules, because even these small things that don't play a huge, they might play an important part, but they're not a huge part of the time spent in the game. They still require quite a lot of rules, and you find that the errata, which are the red bits here, so these are paragraphs from the rules that have been clarifications and additions have been put in. There are quite a few pages of this, and I've actually been going through it. You can see where I've ticked them. It means I've actually added them to the rule book. So it's not quite as much as it looks like on here, because obviously all this is already in the rules. This is the only bit that's added. But so it does mean that my rule book is getting sort of a bit of pencil on almost every page. Now it's not a problem for me, but I think what it does point out is that, and the errata I believe are easily findable on the net, although a quick look on Decision Games' website yesterday, I couldn't find any extra stuff for Dawn of Steel. It is still for sale, and the second edition, which, oh, well, actually I should mention that the second edition of it has all the errata in the rule book already, as well as some extra units and extra play aids as well. So I've got the first edition, so some of that has been addressed, but and the point is that if you say bought the first edition second hand, or you still have it sitting on a shelf and wanted to get into it, you need to get to that errata, and it previously was available on the Decision Games website. I couldn't find it. It might be there, just might not have been removed. But saying that, that's what brought me. So it was considering what to do with this, because in the first turn that I played, I completely ignored the off-map display and the naval units, and the air units didn't really come into it, because at this point in the game, all they can do is reconnaissance, and as a solo player, you often forget the usefulness of that. I mean, as a solo player, I would simulate it as, you know, it would allow me to decide whether it's going to make sense for this, how many units I need to attack a stack, so would I wait for some others to come up or not. So reconnaissance being that it allows you to look at any one enemy stack. But apart from that, there's not many air units on the board. I think the Germans have one, the Russians have one, the French have one, and the British have one. So they could have been used, and if they had been used, the French might well have not done their attack there, which lost them a unit. But so you know, I do need to remember its use later. But the point is, anyway, I remembered that in my play of the first turn, the French got 3 impulses on the western front, and they didn't actually use them because the Germans didn't do anything there, and that they weren't able to break through the German fortifications opposite theirs, and they potentially they could have gone up and prepared an ultimatum for Brussels, but that was quite unlikely to happen, and it's more likely that they go over to the German side. In fact, that might not be such a bad idea. I think, just thinking off the top of my head, because even if the ultimate fails and it goes the opposite way, then you can still enter, and they could have then, so they would have been fighting the Belgians. Well, anyway, they were reluctant to violate the Belgian neutrality, and quite rightly so. They would have lost some morale if Belgium had gone over to Germany, so I don't think it would have been worth it. They only lost 5 morale points instead of, I think maybe it would be 10. If Belgium had gone over, let me see. So I know it would just been 5 as a plus to the Central Powers rather than subtraction from there. Well, anyway, so but these, you know, this is just kind of interesting musings that the game brings out. But then another thing was brought up was these uprising markers. So these in British Africa, North Africa, and in China, which China's actually part, or at least it's friendly to the Entente at the start of the game. But these represent kind of not so much uprisings, but as I mentioned before, German or Central Powers influence in those countries. And what they effectively do is they would, well, in fact, I'm not sure exactly what they effectively do, apart from the fact that if it happens through the role of a table like the colonial campaign table by the Central Powers, the Central Powers designate an off-map area with an uprising marker. The Allies must eliminate 1 corps-sized unit. So all well and good if that happens within the game, but when they start the game like that, there's no units there to eliminate. What's the point in them, and what do they do? So as far as I can tell, I seem to remember reading that they can be removed by simply moving a unit into their area. I can't find that rule again, so I don't know if I dreamt that or what, but it's brought up the question, what is the point in those uprising markers at the start of the game? And I can't find that answered anywhere. So just to give you a flavour of what I'm going through this game, it's not a biggie, obviously, because these regions, I checked to see, oh, do they have industrial centres? Because the industrial centres wouldn't work, but they don't. So they're not contributing to the war in any way, so I don't see why we need them. But then the other point about me needing to find out how you get rid of them could be important, for example, if the British want to move up through North Africa. So that's a little niggle. And what else did I want to talk about? Yeah, it was mainly those two situations, some questions to do with the off-map areas, the uprisings, and then the movement of, in case, or at least it suggested somewhere in the rules that neutrals could go over to the central powers. I guess they would end up just staying there and not doing anything, but I don't find it mentioned in the rules. And then the errata being, I downplayed it before, and I think that was a bit optimistic of me, because essentially it was in reading through the rules a lot more and adding in the errata that I started finding more questions, like to do with the uprising markers and then central powers movement there. So I guess I just sort of blathering. It's quite boring, but I just wanted to talk about that in between turns. So I'm about to start the second turn, and I've got the Entente campaign stroke objective cards out here, trying to figure out what they would possibly do. Okay, I found the rules section that confused me. You see here, off-map naval zones. Previously, can I see one-handedly? Yes, here. Off-map naval zone movement restrictions. Central powers units may not enter off-map areas except for commerce raiding. Now, commerce raiding is a separate area, and it specifically says it's not a sea zone. So commerce raiding is here. Note, the commerce raiding zone isn't part of a global display and isn't considered an off-map area. Perhaps that's where you get confused, the difference between zones and areas. Because here it says there may be enemy naval units in the zones. So yes, that could. So that does include the commerce raiding zone. But then what does this zone refer to? Does it, I presume then it refers to areas, i.e. the seas, and that. But you can see it's a bit confusing. There's some things like that in the rules that look like, you know, when a designer uses different words to talk about the same thing. For example, somewhere else it talks about national will, but as results, if you do bombardment, naval units, they can bombard coastal cities. This may result in changes to national will. Nowhere else is national will mentioned, but it is the morale, the national morale. It has to be, it couldn't be anything else. So there's a few things like that in the rules where either artifacts, like there's other, something like that, where different terms are used that are confusing, than other places where there's artifacts that have been left in and then aren't relevant anymore. For example, amphibious assaults. In some places it says that these can only be performed against unfriendly ports or naval bases. And then elsewhere under the same rules, if the assault unit is intended the port and coast hex, and it says and coast hex in several places, and I've crossed that out even though it wasn't in the errata that I had, because I think that's, you know, part of the rule that changed and it was still left in. So you can't just amphibiously assault any old coastal hex. I think that is what is meant, taking into account, you know, the imperfections of editing and keeping up with rules changes during playtesting. I think the last thing I should say about all of this is that the naval thing does open up quite a big different thing, because to affect commerce raiding, which brings down the entente morale quite drastically and could make it difficult for Great Britain. You need to get Central Powers units off the north edge. And so you do have a whole naval game that can go on with, you know, these fleets trying to combat each other, and fleets can hide their strength and so forth. But it's kind of big. It's a big part of this, but and it involves the off-world map as well. It's difficult getting my head around it, and I think it's mainly because the rules editing and final clarifications is not perfect, and so there's a few ambiguities thrown in there, which I think sort of unbalance my understanding, or what I think is my understanding of what's going on. But I'm kind of like, I'm looking forward to bringing that aspect of the war into play, but I'm feeling kind of like a bit of a block against getting it into play. So once I've got my head around it, I'll go through it and hopefully give it a bit more of a better explanation. And the last thing I should probably say is that there are some things where I made mistakes previously in my rules explanation, so that will evolve if you watch through the series of the plays that I'm going to do. I don't know how many, because it being such a big game, but for example, things like rolling on the merchant shipping index. So I thought that was linked to morale, but it's actually linked to the merchant shipping level. So previously I made a mistake in my description of that, so please bear with me on all that, but I hope nevertheless I'm giving you a general big picture of this game and how it is played. So until next time, see you.